Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Your Mark on the World show. I'm your host, Devin Thorpe, and I'm a Forbes contributor covering social entrepreneurship and impact investing. Our guest today is Daryl Carter. He's the CEO and founder of Avanath, which is a low-income housing investor with $1 billion worth of housing under management. Daryl, welcome to the show.
Delighted to be here.
We're really thrilled to have an opportunity to visit with you and to learn more about what you're doing. But why don't you start by giving us a quick overview?
Avanath Capital Management is a company I formed 9 years ago, and our focus was on really building a better mousetrap in the affordable and workforce housing space. I have found that, in my history, and I've been in the commercial real estate business for 35 years, that it was a market that was, number one, underserved by institutional capital, and two, underserved by what I call the best standards of the apartment industry.
Well, there is a lot for us to talk about, I think, in this space. But one of the things that you try to do, as I understand it, is to keep people in the housing after you buy it and are working to rehabilitate it. How do you do that?
Well, number one, we focus on, one of the things that we've learned in the apartment industry, particularly, and I think you could say this in all segments of all sectors, is that a continuity of good residents breeds a very, very successful community. So while many people focus on buying and renovating and really creating a new resident profile, we certainly, when we renovate, we raise the rents, but we raise the rents to a level that is affordable for the residents that are there. And we try to do what I call smart renovations, where we put in things like washers and dryers that benefit that family, but also there are certain things we don't over improve, which then necessitates raising rents. One of the things that many of my investors, they'll walk through and they'll see like, wow, this really looks great. And then they'll look up at the ceiling and it's the old 1960s or 70s popcorn ceiling. And they'll say, wow, we really want you, it would be great if you can get rid of it. And we say, yeah, it would be great, but I'd have to charge $40 more in rent. And at the end of the day, I think every family can afford a $300 big screen TV, and they're looking at that and not the ceiling.
Yeah, that's right. Boy, that's a great insight. Now, how do you get returns from low-income housing that are adequate without being evil?
Well, unfortunately, the implication behind your question in terms of evil, it underlines part of our strategy, or my strategy for pursuing this business. There are unfortunately a lot of bad actors in the lower end of the apartment space, and not very many what I call highly professional companies. The number is increasing, but historically, it's been dominated, or not dominated, but there are. You get the publicity of the bad actors. A few statistics that might be helpful. The one most important statistic, we lose about 100,000 units of housing each year in this country. That's all at the lower end. It's generally lost because of obsolescence. There needs to be, it isn't in conformity with current business building codes. And so one of our strategies is to acquire housing like that many people have written off, and maybe it's in areas that are primarily communities of color where it's lacked investment. So the first thing is, how do we get the returns? We buy it on a very favorable basis because in many respects it's been abandoned by the previous owner. And so we buy it well, and we then work collaboratively with both our residents and the community elected officials to try to take a holistic approach where we don't invest only in brick and mortar. We try to invest in the residents there. And we do things like after-school programs and other types of things that benefit the residents. So, part of, part of how we do it is we buy very, very well.
You talked a little bit about some of the things that you're doing in addition to the physical facilities. I'd like to explore that a little further. You talked a little bit about after-school programs, but it seems to me that the community that you wish to create and foster is a critically important part, not only of creating a place where people want to live, but also of your economics.
Well, when you start with one fact, I mean, for instance, when you talk about, we own a number of communities that have a large number of Section 8 residents, and most people have perceptions of Section 8 that are generally negative. Even when communities that are 100% Section 8 that we have, most of our residents with Section 8 work. There's a misnomer that most people of Section 8 are on welfare and they don't work. That's simply not true. Most of our residents that have Section 8, not only do they work, but they generally contribute 50 to 60% of the rental rate. So these are people who are working. They pay more of the rent than Section 8 does, and you often have two incomes. And particularly when you talk about locations like where we are located in California or New York, which are very expensive areas, we have Section 8 residents with two incomes that they may make $50,000 to $60,000 a year. And what happens is the school bus pulls up every day at 3 o'clock. And we have a property, for instance, in Long Beach, California. We have over 1,000 kids at that community. So when the school bus pulls up, lets out kids, it's 3 o'clock. Generally, their parents don't get home till 6 or 7 or sometimes later. So you have that period of time that it can make a huge impact, not only on that community, but also on those families. And so we have learned that to create structured activities where it's safe, we give the kids a snack, and we create a very safe environment that the parents know where their children are. And, that reduces our maintenance costs, but more importantly, parents want to stay there. And where we have our after school programs, we have retention rates generally that are 80 to 85%. When residents renew, they want to stay there.
Sure. That's really interesting, and it's really illustrative of the solution you're implementing. Now, what income range, you mentioned that on the coast, people may earn up to $50,000, $60,000 a year. What's the typical household income of the people you're serving?
Well, let's start with one fact. The median income of a renter in the United States is $36,000 a year. So that's the median for every renter in America. And if you look at our communities, our residents typically make from $35,000 to $60,000 a year. So they would be typically at 50 to maybe 80% of area median income. And if you look at a place like Loudoun County, Virginia, which is suburban Washington, D.C., you have incomes, the median income is about $120,000 a year. So, we may have residents who are at 60%, but they're still making $70,000, but rents there are extremely high. And, one fundamental issue we have in this country, we have over 20 million renters in this country, households, that pay more than 50% of their income in rent. When you're paying 50% in income, it has all kinds of effects, including on healthcare, where people then don't spend the money to get more routine checkups and things like that.
But you raise a really important issue, and I want to follow up on that. Certainly, your housing stock, the projects you're investing in, operating, don't serve everyone. They don't serve certainly some of the poorest residents. And I wonder, whose job is it to serve them, and how should they be served?
Well, I mean, we in fact do, 50% of area median income is It's not quite, it's still above the national poverty level, but it is very close. I mean, it's kind of the working class, working poor, if you will. And when you're talking about the level below it, I mean, unfortunately, there have been a lot of things, that was once public housing's domain. And there were once a lot of programs, if you look at the history of HUD. And we didn't have a homeless problem in this country, and that's really the level below where we are. People, or it's incredibly substandard housing,
Right.
And so it's a challenge. I mean, again, people pay a lot of their income in housing, particularly on the two coasts where we principally operate.
Well, it is a scary problem in our country that we have so many people who live in substandard housing and can't afford housing. And I think it's a problem that is universal, or at least nearly universal, where incomes are lower, rent is low. And so you may be able to get an apartment for $600, but if you can't earn, about $1,800 a month, you can't afford the $600, right? So it is a challenge.
At $36,000 a year, someone needs to pay about $1,000 a month. And across our portfolio, it's about our average rents are about $1,100 a month.
Yeah. Well, I want to just take a minute, Daryl, and get some kind of more personal insights from you. You're doing some amazing work, but I like to ask all of the entrepreneurs on the show a few questions just to learn a little bit about them personally. And first, you are really an amazing guy, and I know a lot of people look up to you and admire you, but I wonder, who do you look up to and admire? Who do you see as a role model?
Well, no question, it starts with my parents. They were the best. Both have passed away, and my dad was an auto worker. I grew up in Detroit, and at a time when there was tremendous migration, my parents grew up in Mississippi, where there were very few opportunities, particularly for people of color, and they moved to Detroit to find a better life, and were able to buy a house and really create the American dream for me and my siblings. And so that was probably my number one role model, or my parents. And always there was always a sense, no matter how little they had, was giving back. And both my parents were always they were organizing the neighborhood watch in the neighborhood and part of block clubs and being engaged and involved. And so that was kind of my probably the base of my mentors were my parents. But then, throughout the years, I've been blessed to have some, great people. My first boss at Continental Illinois Bank, where I started my career after business school, Jim Harper, who was someone who had guided my career. And it's one of these things that, I've learned in now 35 years in the real estate business that it's an industry where there are a lot of good people in this industry. There are a few that get bad names. I mean, the Donald Sterlings of the world, and I'm a big basketball fan and actually LA Clippers. So, I look at people like that and say, there needs to be better practices that's in the industry. And one of the most extraordinary books that really touched me was a book, and I cannot think of the author's name, called Eviction, that chronicles all these people in a low-income neighborhood. And it wasn't only, candidly, the physical conditions they lived in were not, that was certainly bad, but I think the lack of dignity in the way they were treated was worse. And that's one thing in our business that we invest in brick and mortar, but I invest a lot in training so that our on-site people are respectful They address our residents in a very respectful manner. And I like to think our business model, in some respects, if you were to say, what's a company that I look at and try to emulate? I think Marriott is a great corporation. They own Ritz-Carlton on one end, and they own Marriott Courtyard on the other. Marriott Courtyard is a tremendous brand. And when you go to a Marriott Courtyard, they're respectful. They treat you the same way. It's clean. It's well managed. And the sheets may not have the same sheet count as the Ritz-Carlton, but they're going to be clean, and you're going to be treated with, and it's a very, very good product. And that's what we try to bring, the same best practices to the lower end of the apartment industry.
Yeah, that's great. I was recalling that book you mentioned, Evicted, won a Pulitzer Prize, fabulous book. Matthew Desmond is the author, and just absolutely a really inspirational book that I like I would recommend to others. Now, Daryl, you could be doing anything. There are lots of ways to make a living, and obviously you're a capable guy. Why have you chosen to focus on this approach that has such a positive impact on the lives of so many?
Well, certainly I've always enjoyed the real estate business and the physical environment, but I also think that when you have ideas that are a little bit against the grain, that sometimes those are the ones to pursue. And very frankly, very few people take on this end of the market. Others now are taking that on. And I just felt there was a huge opportunity, to both generate very attractive returns for our investors, but also to impact some communities. And I thought you could do both. And candidly, when we launched our first fund, we had 6 investors, which included TI, CREF, and Prudential, and some great people who had faith, and they had and candidly, I wasn't, now I can say it, I wasn't sure that this would all work. I thought it could work, but I wasn't sure. And after we made our first series of investments, we really did have an impact on a number of communities in places like West Oakland. And I saw that we could do it. And so, you have a driving, part of it maybe is a little bit of ego of tackling things that other people don't take on and wanting to try to do that. And I think it's you can see, there's nothing that is more pleasurable for me. I walk, generally our standard as a company is we have 4 partners, and one of them walks every property every quarter, and I walk a lot of our properties. And I walk them, I talk to residents, and I love when a resident says, we're really happy here. And I'm going to tell you, certainly there is a good financial return in this business, but there is nothing that makes me as excited as that when I have a resident that comes up and just talks about that they're happy at their home, because it's their home. And we often think that apartment residents, well, they're not, we treat them differently than homeowners, but that's their home.
Yeah, great point. Now, Daryl, what is your superpower?
My superpower? Probably persistence. Because in this business, you hear a lot of no's, and people have lots of myths, and most people doubt it, and unfortunately, people, particularly large institutional investors, they perceive that when you talk about affordable housing, there are going to be shootouts, gangs, and the like. And, you just have to convince people by taking them to our site, but also just continuing to, try to change the dialogue. And one of the things that I'm very proud of, we bought, like I said, we've taken on some real challenges, but one was a very large Section 8 property in Long Beach, and it had we have 1,000 kids that have very little amenities. And one of the things that people often do, because they're concerned, well, if you create, for instance, some certain amenities, you'll attract gang members. And so we decided to build a state-of-the-art basketball court, and I'm a former basketball player, so and people say, well, you're going to have gangs. I said, well, they're our residents, so I want them to have that amenity. And, we actually sat down with a number of the gang members. We have a nonprofit partner that does our after-school program, which is the Christ Our Redeemer First AME Church. And the pastor, Mark Whitlock, gathered a bunch of the gang members and sat down, and we outlined what we were going to do. And these young men have been incredibly respectful. They have been, it's been safe. We have not had any incidents. And so, and we have various clinics. My 13-year-old daughter actually goes and she plays on an AAU basketball team, and her coach runs a clinic there. So she goes there. And so I don't worry about the safety because, if I'm sending my 13-year-old daughter there, then I think it's safe. But I think that that's my mentality with every property. If your child's going to live there, I want them to be safe, and my child should be able to go to that property as well.
Fantastic. Well, Daryl, I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us. Before you go, can you just tell us how people can learn more about your operation and how they can connect with you personally?
Well, we're based in Irvine, California. Again, the company is Avanth Capital Management, and our website is www.avanth.com. And by the way, Avanth is named after my children, Ava and Nathan. So that's where the name comes from.
Excellent. Well, Daryl, thank you very much again for being with us, and we wish you every success in helping to provide housing for America's working people.
Thank you, Devin. I really appreciate talking to you.
All righty. Let's do some good.